This is for my fellow hunters!
Hey guys, this is Tabiasobi, and today, finally, the embargo has lifted for my interview with producer Ryozo Tsujimoto and director Yasunori Ichinose for Monster Hunter Rise. Yeah, so I did an interview last month with the developers about not just Monster Hunter Rise, but also Monster Hunter Stories 2, so I'll make sure to do a separate video for that game as well. By the way, since this always comes up when I do one of these, for folks wondering how a YouTube channel with just under 7,000 subs, such as myself, has managed to get an interview with Capcom devs, my actual job is as a business and technology reporter. So I've done this kind of stuff a lot over the years for the Reno Gazette Journal and also USA Today. In fact, the interview I did was actually for an article that I wrote for those two news outlets, which is also coming off embargo at the same time. So please feel free to check those as well by clicking the link on the description. Or is it in the description? Grammar. Oh yeah, and I also apologize in advance, just in case the audio is not super great. I am actually recording this from inside my car. Hey, you gotta work with what you've got. Yeah, so I pretty much got to ask both Tsujimoto-san and Ichinose-san about 20 questions involving Monster Hunter Rise within the 30 minutes that I had with them during the Zoom call. Now, unfortunately, I was not allowed to post the audio from the interview, so I'll just read the answers that they gave me in response to my questions. Now, obviously, they wanted to discuss some of the new features that were revealed for the game, so of course I started with those. So first, I asked them, how did you come up with the idea for the Wirebug? Anyway, this is what Ichinose-san said. So the last game I worked on was Monster Hunter Generations, and after that, I felt like I've pretty much done what I could with the action as far as the classic Monster Hunter series was concerned. So with Monster Hunter Rise, I wanted to add something completely new. Since the game was going to have seamless maps, I wanted to have something else that was more fun when it came to moving around, and that's where the idea for the Wirebug came about. Monster Hunter World already had a strong exploratory element, and I wanted to expand that further by allowing you to go wherever you want with the Wirebug. You can use it to climb up walls and reach places you normally can't get to in order to find all sorts of hidden areas. In addition to using it for movement, I also wanted to integrate it into the moveset for hunters, which allows them to perform new attacks. And then after that I asked, speaking of actions, do Wirebug arts work like the old hunter arts? And by that I meant, do you have to select them from a list of several arts at the beginning of the hunt, or are all the moves for a specific weapon accessible at any time? To that, Ichinose-san said, you can use the available Wirebug arts for a weapon anytime. So basically that means no need to select from a list of many. Whatever Wirebug art is available for a particular weapon, you're going to have access to all of them in the course of a hunt. And then after that I asked two more questions, specifically about the new canine partners. And so I asked, can you talk about how the idea behind the Palamutes came about? Also, are you considering Palamute skin options like Amaterasu from Okami or Wolf Link from Legend of Zelda? I actually found that last question quite amusing. Anyway, Ichinose-san said, we've always received a lot of fan feedback for some kind of dog companion. Since we've only had Palicos in the past, a lot of people wanted to be able to go hunt with dogs, which is something they are now able to do with Monster Hunter Rise. To that, Tsujimoto-san added, as far as skins and crossovers, we have some skins and layered armor for Palamutes, but we don't have any collaborations planned yet for something like Amaterasu or Wolf Link. The development team is still hard at work at finishing the game, but that's something we will be looking into in the future. So yeah, they're not in there as of now, but the game is still in development, so it's quite possible they will be added in the future, especially given how responsive the dev team is to fan feedback. And then after that, I asked a question that was pretty much a source of big debate during the World days, which is weapons and armor designs. And so I asked them, will the weapons and armor designs for existing monsters be based on classic Monster Hunter or Monster Hunter World? The answer to this question I thought was pretty interesting. So basically they said, for monsters returning from Monster Hunter World, we will use the armor from World. And then for monsters that were in older titles only, we will use the older armor and polish them up a bit so they look nicer. So far those answers make a lot of sense, but what about monsters that appeared in both the old and new games? So to that they said, for monsters that appeared in both the old games and World, we will use the newest designs from World. However, since Monster Hunter World also had the slinger as part of the armor, some changes needed to be made, obviously, because there is no slinger in Monster Hunter Rise. Now, when I asked this question, I asked about both weapons and armor, but I wasn't quite sure if they were only referring to armor here or weapons as well. And obviously this is a big deal for some folks because the weapon designs typically looked better in the classic series than they did in World, especially when it came to the weapons. Anyway, after that I asked 2 more questions. So I asked, are we getting any other weapons besides the existing 14? Also, will it be possible to play as a Prowler cat in this game? To that they responded, Monster Hunter Rise will have the same 14 weapons from past titles, but you'll be able to use the Wirebug for making new actions, so there's a lot of new cool stuff that you can do. As far as hunting as a Palico, there will be no Prowler mode this time. Personally, I loved Prowler mode. So that last part is a bit of a bummer, but so far no Prowler mode for now. And then I asked, will there be an option for layered weapons and armor? And to that they just pretty much said yes. Of course, one of the things that a lot of people wanted to learn about is how multiplayer will work in this game. So I asked them, as far as multiplayer, will you be able to play both story quests and non-story quests together like World? And just for some extra oomph, I also asked, hey, can we skip the cutscenes? So their response was, it will be a bit different from World. Monster Hunter Rise uses a more classic style of gameplay where quests are separated into single-player village quests and multiplayer Gathering Hub quests. The Gathering Hub quests will also have cutscenes, but you can skip them anytime you want. You also will not be required to reach a certain progression in the story in order to play quests together at the Gathering Hub. Yeah, so basically story and multiplayer quests will be separate once again, just like they were in the old games. And by separate, they're actually really separate, so if you're one of those guys in the old games who just wanted to do the online Gathering Hub missions, then you can do that without having to do the story quests. Now onward to my next question, what's the player scaling like going to be for hunts? And will monster health or HP change depending on the number of players? To that they responded, yes, Monster Hunter Rise will have scaling based on the number of players. So basically just like World. And then I asked something that everybody who plays the game wants to know, which is how will armor skills and decorations work in Monster Hunter Rise? Will it be more like World, or will it be more like classic Monster Hunter? So for those who only played World, in the old games, you couldn't get partial levels for skills like you do now. And by that I mean you either got a skill by putting all the necessary points, or you got none of the skill, so no level 1, level 2, level 3, that kind of stuff. It was pretty much all or nothing. At least that's how I remembered it. So anyway, what was their response? Well, they pretty much said that's something that we still can't talk about at this time, which I totally expected. But hey, I had to ask. Now, as someone who started the game as a Bowgun main, I naturally wanted to know how the Bowgun controls were. So I asked, will the aim mechanic for ranged weapons be like World? And will there be support for motion-based aiming, like with Zelda on the Switch? The response was, it's based on the system in World, but it's not 100% the same because we have to adapt it to the Switch platform. That means that it's going to have some unique elements. And yes, you can use motion controls for aiming as well. Now I understand that motion controls are kind of polarizing for a lot of people, but when they do work, especially for aiming, I think they actually work pretty well, so it's nice to have the option. And it didn't sound like it was mandatory, so it looks like you can turn it on or off. After that I asked, will there be a rotating event schedule and regular updates just like with World? To that, Tsujimoto-san replied, for Monster Hunter World, we assume that most people will be playing online all the time, so we use that specific system for event quests. But this time, since Monster Hunter Rise will be on the Switch, and not everyone will be online all the time, we are using the same classic system that we did in Monster Hunter Double Cross, which would be Generations Ultimate for folks who played the Western version. Yeah, so he said we will be using the same classic system that we did in Monster Hunter Double Cross, where you can download quests in advance. So with that, it sounds like they pretty much accounted for the fact that folks playing in the Switch's portable mode might not have access to online when they're on the go, so they're moving back to permanently downloaded quests for the game. Anyway, for folks who prefer the old system, this is great since you don't have to rush to do events that disappear after a limited time, especially if you're busy with work or life, which is something I can totally relate to. It's the reason I haven't been able to fully update my Kulve Taroth gear yet. After that, I asked about quality of life improvements, where I specifically mentioned the fact that, just like with World, it seems that hunters no longer do the flex motion or guts pose from the classic games when drinking potions. To that, Ichinose-san said, yes, there are a lot of quality of life improvements from World that we are bringing into Monster Hunter Rise. We've heard a lot of fan feedback, so we're bringing in the stuff that people like and moving away from the things that players didn't like as much. And then Tsujimoto-san also followed up and said, one of the reasons we got rid of the flexing pose was because we wanted the game to play as smoothly as possible. The flex pose was something we only used back when the map was still split into different sections that had to load separately. Since we got rid of those separate sections and Rise is using seamless locales, we decided to get rid of the flex pose as well. I believe I've heard them say the same thing when they were asked this question about World. After that, my next question was basically a popular source of debate within the community, which is, how will the monster count compare to past titles? Will it be closer to something like Generations Ultimate, or will it be more like World or the original Try, which didn't have as many monsters? Tsujimoto-san said, we get asked this question a lot, and we don't really have an answer to it because we aren't focused on the number of monsters when we create a game. For every game, we have a new concept or theme that we are working with. Then as we develop the game, we start looking at which monsters fit that theme and new system, and which ones would be most fun to fight, and that's what we base the volume of monsters on. We don't really look at the actual number of monsters. Yeah, so honestly that's been their standard response every time this question gets asked, so I was not surprised. Then after that I asked 2 more questions, which I honestly suspected that they were not probably going to answer, especially this early in the process of developing the game, but it was worth a shot. So my question was, can you talk at all about a potential G rank or Master rank option for the game? And their answer to that was short and sweet. It was like, no. Which I thought was funny, and we all kind of got a chuckle after that. And then moving along the same lines, I asked, will Monster Hunter Rise feature special powered up versions of monsters, kind of like tempered monsters in World or Deviants in Generations? To that, they responded, please wait for future information for monster details. Yeah, so they're also mum about that, but at least they didn't end the answer with please understand. And at this point I was kind of running out of time, and I wanted to save some time for Monster Hunter Stories 2. So I asked about a fan favorite option, which is, will Monster Hunter Rise have the series' unique Monster Hunter language as an option? So I know this probably isn't that important for many players, especially new players, but for purists and fans who played the old games, Monster Hunter language is actually a big deal. So I asked about it, and they said, for Monster Hunter Rise, the Monster Hunter language voiceover will be included. There will be basically 3 language options that you can choose from, which are Japanese, English, and then of course Monster Hunter language. So I guess no habla español or French for now, but hey, at least we get Monster Hunter language. Yeah, so anyway, at this point I only had 5 minutes left, so I switched to asking questions about Stories 2. Also, when you're doing interviews in 2 languages that require translation, those 30 minutes can go by pretty quick. Anyway, what do you think of the information that they shared about Monster Hunter Rise? As always, please feel free to share any thoughts or questions that you may have in the comment section. Once again, this is Tabi Asobi, and thank you for watching.
After it!
I'll show no mercy! Get ready!
This is for my fellow hunters!
Shall we go?